Tonight on Perspectives, Britain expels 23 Russian diplomats over the poisoning of a former Russian spy, and Moscow threatens to retaliate in kind. No more guns, mass walkouts from schools across the United States in protest at inaction over gun massacres. And leaving a black hole in our hearts, legendary physicist Stephen Hawking is dead at 76. Hello, I'm Eylon Levy and welcome to Perspectives. You've seen the headlines, you've read the news, and now you're watching the show that explores the perspectives you haven't heard. Our top story: Britain will expel 23 Russian diplomats in retaliation for the poisoning of a former Russian double agent. Prime Minister Theresa May said the attack was an unlawful use of force against the United Kingdom itself. Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia are in critical condition after being exposed to a deadly Russian-made nerve agent. A policeman is also in serious condition. May had given Russia a deadline to explain how nerve agent Novichok was used on British soil, but Russia denied any involvement. Here's what Theresa May told the British Parliament. And here
they have provided no credible explanation that could suggest they lost control of their nerve agent. No explanation as to how this agent came to be used in the United Kingdom. No explanation as to why Russia has an undeclared chemical weapons programme. Instead, they have treated the use of a military-grade nerve agent in Europe with sarcasm, contempt and defiance. So, Mr. Speaker, there is no alternative conclusion other than that the Russian state was culpable for the attempted murder of Mr. Skripal and his daughter.
And here are the sanctions that London is imposing on Moscow. 23 Russian diplomats in the UK. The UK says their secret spies have 1 week to leave. Russian state assets will be frozen if they might be used to threaten British lives. The FIFA World Cup will be boycotted by British ministers and the royal family. And all planned high-level bilateral relations are now off. Now, Russia is preparing to respond in kind to the single biggest expulsion of Russian diplomats since the Cold War. It's calling the expulsion a hostile action. The Russian ambassador in London said British diplomats will also be expelled from Moscow. Well, joining us now for a Russian perspective is Alexander Bratursky, a senior foreign policy writer at Moscow-based news website Gazeta.ru. Alexander, thank you for joining us. Theresa May said that there is no alternative conclusion other than that Russia was behind the poisonings. Do you agree?
I don't agree with this, because actually it's despite that this agent is definitely Russian-made, it doesn't mean that Russia was carrying this attack. Although I don't exclude the role of Russia, let me be frank. However, there should be further investigation made jointly by the two sides. Unfortunately, because either side is not listening to another. I mean, the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs today made a pretty reasonable reason why don't they use the international organization to ban chemical weapons. You know how this actually sounds like. I forgot the real acronym. So that organization, the UN organization, where Russia is a member, and actually give the samples and actually give access to the U.S.
But Alexander, Theresa May had given Russia a deadline to either fess up that it had used the chemical weapon, or explain how chemicals it had manufactured somehow got out of its control. It says it received nothing but sarcasm. Why do you think Russia didn't use this time to explain, if, as you say, it wasn't Russia, how these very dangerous chemicals managed to get out of its control?
It is very difficult to explain it from the very first, because it's actually very difficult to find out what the chemical was used, because actually they did not provide a sample, as I heard from the Russian side. And let's say, as many housewives share their receipts, so share they kind of like cakes that they make. Actually, those kind of the Novichok whatever can be made by someone else. even if it was Russian, it was originally made in Russia. That's also possible. And
well, Alexander, let's take a different look from the question of the origin of the chemical. You know, this isn't a one-off example. There was the famous case of Alexander Litvinenko, a former Russian spy who was poisoned with a radioactive substance, a very big BuzzFeed investigation into other suspicious deaths. I mean, who is killing off these ex-Russian spies if it isn't the Kremlin?
Well, yes, sure. The Litvinenko case brings an example, but let's say if Litvinenko was actually, killed by Russian agents, that doesn't mean Mr. Skripal was. But that sounds like, two similar cases, but they're kind of like different. Mr. Skripal was exchanged, kept a low profile, while Mr. Litvinenko was an aggressive crusader against the Russian state. I'm not defending or blaming his death, but you know what? In 1995 in Moscow, the businessman by the name of Alexander Kivalidi was killed, but with kind of the same agent. So it looks like, and he was killed by a banker, an rival of him. So some people actually say with the same Novichok thing. So it looks like it was on the loose already in the 1980s, and he was used by the criminal gang.
Okay,
so
Alexander Brzezinski, thank you for that excellent, interesting insight. And actually, another figure making the exact same argument that it's possible it wasn't the Kremlin at all was British opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn. He has drawn criticism in the UK for casting doubt on Russian culpability for the poisonings, suggesting that Britain should take up Russia's offer for the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to conduct its own inquiry.
How has she responded to the Russian government's request for a sample of the agent used in the Salisbury attack to run its own tests? Has high-resolution trace analysis been run on a sample of the nerve agent, and has that revealed any evidence as to the location of its production or the identity of its perpetrators? And can the Prime Minister update the House on what conversations, if any, she has had with the Russian government? And while suspending planned high-level contacts, does the Prime Minister agree that it is essential to maintain a robust dialogue with Russia in the interest of our own and wider international security?
We gave the Russian government the opportunity, through the démarche that my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, delivered to the Russian ambassador here in London earlier this week, to do just that. They have not done so.
Our UK correspondent Jonathan Sacerdotti joins us now from London. Jonathan, Theresa May seems pretty sure now that it was Russia, despite only 2 days ago saying it was possible that these were chemicals that had slipped out of Russia's control. Where's the certainty coming from?
In a sense, I think she was giving Russia the benefit of the doubt the other day. She says that these chemicals have the fingerprint of Russia on them. It's like a calling card, if you will. And she presumably has some level of intelligence that she hasn't produced publicly in the House of Commons or in the media. But she is very certain now, she says, that having offered them those two options, their response as well confirmed to her that Russia is not treating this seriously enough and did not, for example, suggest that, yes, they may have somehow not kept tabs of all of their nerve agent and some rogue actor had used it. Instead, they reacted with such disdain, she said, that she's left with no other option.
Jonathan, these are some pretty dramatic steps we're seeing from Theresa May. This was the assassination of a former spy. Is she not going overboard by calling this an unlawful use of force against the United Kingdom itself?
Well, Russia, of course, thinks exactly that, saying that not only are they unconnected to the poisoning, but they also have been treated badly by the UK since it took place. They're calling Mrs. May's actions a flagrant provocation that undermines the foundation of normal dialogue between our countries. But the UK has some legitimate case for outrage. Mrs. May points to the use of a military-grade nerve agent on the streets of the UK, chemical weapons, in effect, in an attempt to kill British citizens within the United Kingdom. And one of the chemists who worked on the production of these nerve agents, originally the Novichok agents, has said that those passers-by who came in touch with traces of it could be affected for years to come, even if they don't show symptoms right now. OK, Jonathan Sacerdotti keeping an eye on an extraordinary case that seems to have jumped straight out of the Cold War for us from London. Thank you very much. We are now taking a very short break, but coming up, firing by tweet. We'll take a look at what Rex Tillerson's shock ouster from the State Department means for US foreign policy and
why is Turkey pushing ahead with its invasion of Syria? More of that coming up in just a minute.
Stories that touch your heart and open your eyes. Stories that take you on a journey and show you something you will never forget. Look through the lens and see what others see. High definition, documentaries and discussions that connect us all.
I'm Emily Francis on I-24 News. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
Welcome back to Perspectives. Well, the U.S. State Department is reeling from President Trump's firing of Secretary of State Rex Tillerson over Twitter. No less, CIA Chief Mike Pompeo is preparing to take the reins. But what does Pompeo's nomination say about the direction of U.S. policy here in the Middle East? Our senior international affairs correspondent Owen Elterman takes a look.
What does U.S. President Donald Trump want to do in the Middle East? This is the latest sign. Mike Pompeo, the man Trump has nominated to be his next Secretary of State. Trump has said the two think alike.
We're always on the same wavelength.
And if they're on the same wavelength, then what Pompeo thinks about the Middle East is a sign of what his boss thinks.
Iran, the world's largest state sponsor of terror, has become an even more emboldened and disruptive player in the Middle East.
That was Pompeo more than a year ago in his confirmation hearing to head the CIA. By all accounts, Pompeo's opinions haven't changed. He's a harsh critic of the Iran nuclear deal, which Trump has pledged to either change or pull out of by May 12th. By tapping Pompeo, Trump has signaled he'll take a tough line. Many in Israel will be pleased.
We will have a tremendous amount of a meeting of the minds when it comes to dealing with the greatest threat that this country faces, and not only this country, but the region, and I believe the world, and that is the threat of Iran.
Pompeo is expected to be friendly towards Israel and potentially more involved than his predecessor in the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's unclear if Pompeo will push for a tougher line on Iran's presence in southern Syria, an issue high on Israel's agenda. But overall, this is a Secretary of State who will accentuate Trump's instincts, a hard-charging, even hard-line American diplomacy. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is geopolitical strategist John Sitlidis. John, thank you for joining us. President Trump fired Tillerson, saying they didn't see eye to eye on Iran. But did Tillerson ever stop the president from carrying out a certain foreign policy, or was there just tension along the way?
It was more a matter of tension, and severe tension, and growing tension, especially over the two most important security issues that the Trump administration is contending with. One, as your correspondent just pointed out, is the growing influence of Iran throughout the Middle East. That is a major priority of President Trump to confront and to put down, and I think having Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State to work as a partner of President Trump in carrying out that agenda is critical. And I think also on North Korea, there was a sense that Secretary Tillerson was too eager to sit down with Kim Jong-un before President Trump was able to really ratchet up the kind of maximum pressure sanctions that he's been able to in recent weeks. And so on those two overriding security issues, Tillerson was simply out of sync with President Trump's thinking.
Well, out of sync with President Trump's thinking, but depends when, because, of course, irony of ironies, President Trump now wants to meet Kim Jong-un. So let's have a look at North Korea. First, Trump was against dialogue with North Korea. Now he's in favor. Where does Pompeo fit within this picture?
Well, first, I don't know that I would say that President Trump was against dialogue with North Korea. The issue is timing and under what conditions. I think President Trump wants to make very clear to Kim Jong-un.
He was wasting his time, did he not?
It was before there was a sense that President Trump is deadly serious, backed up by, say, Secretary Mattis at DOD and National Security Advisor McMaster, that the U.S. is putting a very credible threat of the use of military force in order to achieve the denuclearization agenda that Mr. Trump has put forward. And Tillerson was not working in sync with the president, with the Secretary of Defense, or the NSC. He was out of sync there, and it's cost him dearly.
So what can we expect to see from Secretary of State Pompeo on North Korea?
Well, on North Korea, I think you're going to see a synchronization here, first of all, of a reassurance of our allies in South Korea and Japan that we're working together to try to achieve this goal, as well as ensuring that China understands that the Trump administration is deadly serious about achieving its denuclearization agenda in the peninsula. And I think it's going to be a harmonization of policies between the White House, the NSC, and the State Department in a way that we simply didn't see under Secretary Tillerson, unfortunately. I think similarly, you'll see a very strong policy towards absolute containment of Iran, maximum enforcement of the agreement, and potentially even a tossing of the agreement, depending on how Pompeo is able to work that strategy with our European allies, who remain committed to keeping the nuclear agreement in place with Iran.
John, finally, if you're a betting man, can I take a bet from you? How long do you give Pompeo in the job, given the rate of turnover in the Trump administration?
Look, I would put Pompeo in a different category, to be very fair. It's just the way Ambassador Nikki Haley at the United Nations has been very much, again, in sync with President Trump. And she looks to be in place for as long as she continues to carry out her agenda along the lines of what President Trump is seeking to do. If Mike Pompeo is doing a tough, effective, aggressive job as Secretary of State in line with the foreign policy and national security agenda that President Trump wants to lay out, and I think he'll do so even more aggressively in this second year now that President Trump is a lot more comfortable in the White House, I think Secretary Pompeo could ride out the entire term, if not more.
Okay. John Sidolides, geopolitical strategist, thank you very much for joining us to shed light on the change of guard at the State Department, and it's out with the old and in with an old history raising uncomfortable questions for the United States. Mike Pompeo's move to the State Department means Gina Haspel will take over the CIA. She's the agency's first ever female director, but she also played a key role in the Bush administration's extraordinary rendition program, in which suspected terrorists were handed over to foreign governments and then tortured overseas by the CIA. Our senior defense correspondent Shai Ben-Ari has more.
The appointment of Gina Haspel to be the next CIA director has sent shockwaves through Washington and other world capitals for different reasons. The current deputy director, Haspel, is expected to become the first female CIA chief in history. She is an award-winning career intelligence officer, highly respected within the organization. But she also has a highly controversial past. Haspel has been linked to the use of torture under the Bush administration against suspected al-Qaeda terrorists.
She ran a black site at Thailand where there were brutal interrogations of some detainees. When she got back to Washington, she played various leadership roles in the components of the CIA that were involved in those operations.
During the period she ran the site, Abu Zubaydah, a suspected terrorist, was waterboarded 83 times in a single month. Other torture methods included physical abuse, sleep deprivation, and being kept in a box. Haspel's former CIA boss, Jose Rodriguez, wrote in his book that she even gave orders to shred videotape evidence of such interrogations.
This was a deliberate decision to destroy evidence, and may very well have been evidence of a crime scene.
Her past could complicate her Senate confirmation process, with top Democrats promising to ask plenty of questions. Republican John McCain, himself a victim of torture, said Haspel needed to explain the extent and nature of her involvement. In Israel, reactions were different. Despite the controversy, two recently retired senior Israeli defense officials who spoke to I-24 News expressed major satisfaction at Haspel's appointment, noting her professional reputation and the fact that she was promoted from within CIA. One of them added the choice indicated the U.S. had moved closer to the Israeli viewpoint in relation to terror and the means needed to fight it. Extreme interrogation techniques have been used extensively in Israel for years in fighting terrorism. Shai Ben-Ari, I-24 News.
Okay, we're taking another short break. Coming up, we'll move to Syria. While Ghouta was being bombed, Afrin was cut off from water. What does this mean for the future of a country entering its 8th year of civil war? And what Israel could teach the United States about gun control? More of that coming up in a bit.
Israel, the Middle East, the world. Get your daily dose every morning on I-24 News. News from around the world to around the corner. Jeff Smith brings you the top stories, the hard news, and analysis you need to know.
Strictly Security. Your weekly look into security, intelligence, and strategic affairs. Our team brings the latest on the major international conflicts. Analysis of the major security issues right here in the Middle East and around the globe. Join us for a close look at innovative military technology and get up to speed with what's happening in cyberspace. Saturdays only on I-24 News.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. I-24 News presents The New Rundown. Co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on I-24 News.
Politics, economics, business, and technology. Get the real news and the real insight about what's happening around the world. Michelle McCory breaks down the top stories of the day from the Middle East to the U.S. Weeknights beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to Perspectives. Let's move now to our nightly segment, which looks at the biggest stories in the Middle East being drowned out by the deluge of daily news. This is Under the Radar. Here in the studio, we have our Middle East correspondent, Emily Rose. Thank you for joining us. But first, Turkey's invasion of northern Syria. The Turkish military ploughed into Syria's Afrin region in January to attack the Kurdish rebels on the border. Now Turkey has surrounded the city of Afrin, and the UN says it has been cut off from water for a week. Thousands of people have fled their homes, and an estimated 700,000 souls are trapped in the besieged city. That offensive has sparked protests all around the world. Several hundred pro-Kurdish demonstrators clashed with police outside the American embassy in Paris. Protesters burnt posters of Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Athens, and in London, pro-Kurdish protesters gathered outside the Russian embassy, demanding that Russia interfere with the ongoing Turkish invasion in Syria's Afrin. Let's take a look. And here in the studio, we have our Middle East correspondent, Emily Rose. Emily, tomorrow marks the anniversary, Syria entering its 8th year of civil war. And at this stage, it can be very confusing to understand who's against who. So to clarify, what is Turkey doing invading Syria in the first place?
It's important to remember here that the Afrin region is controlled by the YPG militia. That's a Kurdish militia. And Turkey sees that as an extension of the PKK. That's their own Kurdish party, which they deem terrorists. Now, they
and others around the world, the United States, recognizes as a terrorist outfit.
That's right. And I think that the rhetoric that Erdogan has been put out since the beginning of this Operation Olive Branch, as they've called it, has been quite clear. Let's have a listen to what he had to say, because I think that explains it.
3,444 terrorists have been neutralized, and we are advancing closer to Afrin. I hope that Afrin town will fall completely by night. If Turkey had aimed to kill civilians, Afrin would have been captured a long time ago. But we are showing all kinds of sensitivities, and we are very careful. Right now, civilians are being evacuated in cars through a special corridor.
Operation Olive Branch sounds like the most euphemistic name in the history of warfare. What's actually happening there?
Well, actually, there's an assault happening on the ground. We can see that Erdogan seems to be taking a chapter out of Assad's book. He's managed to besiege this area of militias. Actually, if we look at a map, I think we have a map, we can show that he is actually besieging the areas which cuts off the militias from supplies, and it cuts off people on the ground from humanitarian aid. And that's why, as you mentioned before, this entire region is now cut off from water, and we're seeing a compounding humanitarian crisis. So it's a double-edged sword.
This is a deliberate strategy of provoking humanitarian distress.
We know that this certainly mirrors a strategy that we've seen used by Assad in the region, and it could be that this is the path that he's following, and it becomes an almost war of attrition because the rebels are cut off from supplies. They can then paint them into a corner of secession and perhaps retreat and force them to surrender.
Emily, Turkey is a NATO ally. It's meant to be in an alliance with the United States, the rest of the West. How long is NATO going to let Turkey get away with it? And I mean, come to think of it, why has NATO been letting it get away with it all this time anyway?
Well, that's certainly a big question, and it sent ripples through NATO. We also know that Erdogan has threatened to extend this operation up to the northern town of Manbij, where there are actually U.S. Special Ops troops on the ground. So this could go further. I want to just, let's have a listen to what the French foreign minister said on this.
In regards to Turkey's offensive, which has been going on in Afrin for about 50 days now, I share your concerns. I'm saying that the situation is critical and serious. I said it again now. Regarding the border, we also have to say at the same time, it does not justify the deep incursion by Turkish troops into the area around Afrin.
It's been 7 years of civil war, Assad beginning to reassert his control in Syria, but then here comes Turkey and begins to occupy a part of northern Syria. Is this region ever going to become part of a central Syrian state again?
Well, that's a big question, and many observers are possibly trying to see what could come of this, speaking about potential autonomous regions that are controlled by different patrons. But I actually think the real answer lies in something that we saw this week. Let's listen to what the foreign minister said, the Turkish foreign minister said this week in relation to the Kremlin.
We have taken important steps to stop the collapse of Syria, to create the zones of non-clash areas and to stabilize Syria in general terms. So regarding our efforts, our relationship is much better than how it was 1.5 years ago.
Break that down for us. What does it mean? Are we talking about a permanent Turkish presence in Afrin, or is this some sort of lightning strike force where they're going to go in, knock out the baddies, I mean, as far as they're concerned, and then withdraw?
Well, I think it could be, but I think that's what we saw from that soundbite and from the events that have happened in the past few weeks, is that Russia is really asserting its influence in the region, and we can see other countries sort of cozying up to Russia. We know that it's asserting its power, and the U.S. is almost taking a little bit of a step back, and with that, perhaps NATO. So we could have seen what in that soundbite and in other actions, perhaps the hint of the fact that Russia is the new top dog in the region, and perhaps it can bring an end to some of the violence, but also assert its influence and its powers.
Truly an extraordinary situation here. We have a NATO ally that seems to be in cahoots with Russia in such a sensitive spot. It's an issue we'll continue to follow and see how that impacts on the geopolitics of this decade. Emily Rose, thank you very much for joining us. We are now taking a break. Coming up, our own correspondent Eylon Levy went to a shooting range to investigate why Israel has such low gun crime rates. Also coming up, leaving a black hole in our hearts, the world says goodbye to the legendary physicist Stephen Hawking.
The trends, the fads, the breakthroughs. Get it all on Trending. From food, music, and art to advances in modern medicine. Meet the trendsetters and the tech giants who make it all happen on Trending with Emily Francis.
unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights, David Schuster and Shayna Estulin bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
Welcome back to Perspectives. Enough is enough. Students from nearly 3,000 schools across the United States have walked out of their classrooms in protest at inaction over gun massacres. They stood outside for 17 minutes. Why? Well, that's 1 minute for each of the 17 victims from the deadly shooting at the Parkland, Florida school last month. Well, I-24 News' Marcus White was there on the ground. Marcus, describe the mood for us, please, as you saw it on the ground. Are we talking anger, frustration, fear?
No anger, no fear, just students with a strong message. So I went to one of these protests at a high school in Manhattan, the Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis High School. These students walked out of school at just around 10 a.m. They came out and literally there was just a stream of students, about 200 students. Then a few students spoke. They basically said what you were saying earlier, enough is enough. And then they read the names of all of the victims of the shooting in Parkland, Florida. Then the students stood for a moment of silence, and then we spoke to some of them about why they felt it was so important to take a stand against gun violence.
It's just sad that I go into the building knowing that maybe one of my classmates, could just take a gun and, have a massacre on us, and it's just sad.
It really hit close to home for us that we can wake up Monday and not see our parents again.
We're in great danger. We're in risk of being shot.
I have this moral right to come and fight for those that have died. Not only are people's lives on the line, but my life might be on the line too. And we have to fight this incident and stop this problem from increasing.
We are rising up and our voice needs to be heard. We are the next generation of change.
Difficult words to listen to, Marcus, but what specifically are the students demanding? Do they have a policy agenda?
So specifically, many students at these protests across the country did not have a specific policy agenda, but some of them at some of these protests did want tougher gun laws, and also they did want the gun used in the attack in Parkland, Florida, the AR-15, banned.
Marcus, how did this come about? Do the students have some form of central leadership? Is there an organization that is behind it? It all seems very well coordinated.
Of course, you can imagine that there had to be some coordination. There being 3,000 schools across the U.S. and a couple of schools worldwide participating in this, all at 10 a.m. their local time, walking out of class and participating in this event for 17 minutes. There's an organization that's called Empower, and they also did organize some of the marches that we saw against Donald Trump throughout the president's campaign, and a few marches that are very supportive of the women's movement. And these marches were organized by the Women's Network Group, their youth division, which is called Empower, and they do plan to have more of these rallies against gun laws, more of these rallies for tougher gun laws in the future.
Okay, Marcus White joining us from Times Square in New York. Thank you very much. After the Parkland massacre, former Governor Mike Huckabee said Israel got it right on guns, with armed guards able to take out active shooters. But if Israel got it right, it wasn't in a way Huckabee liked, because it's with gun control that is extremely strict. I-24 News reporter Eylon Levy went to a shooting range to investigate and shot this report.
In Israel, a gun strapped to somebody's hip is a very common sight. Soldiers, security personnel, and yes, even civilians. So much so that roughly 2% of Israeli civilians have personal firearms, according to government data, and an equal number own firearms as security guards. And this in turn has caused many Americans, including the firearms lobby, to compare the two countries. But there are enormous differences. The key difference is that in Israel, owning a firearm is a privilege, not a right, and that's a privilege the government very jealously guards.
Not every person in Israel has the right to carry a firearm. The government decides to give this privilege to people only if they live in a dangerous area according to what the government thinks, or in their work they need a firearm, or they served in a very special unit in the Israeli army, and there are a little bit more criteria.
So what are these criteria? A firearms applicant must work in the security sector, and if they don't, the restrictions are rather tight. They must be 21 years old if they have served in the Army, or 27 if they did not. They must have lived in the country for a minimum of 3 years. A clean criminal record is needed, as well as a clean bill of health and mental health signed by a doctor. They must also live or work in what the ministry deems a dangerous area, conflict zones, settlement blocks, or anything over the green line. But perhaps the biggest difference, though, is cultural attitudes towards firearms.
It is these civilians who have been properly armed who have acted as first responders in many, many cases. And that's sort of become a little bit of the aha moment in at least the last year or two, where the ministries involved, and as well as the police, etc., they sort of said, you know what, maybe we should start allowing more people to carry a gun.
In Israel, with its near universal military conscription, firearms is seen as a necessary emergency tool. In the past 10 years, civilians with firearms have stopped around 50 terror attacks, according to data from Bar-Ilan University. But in America, it's a universal right and has a huge sporting culture built around it, but very limited federal control. And while states and even cities maintain their own laws, some of which can be even more restrictive than Israel's, it's very hard to draw any real comparison between the two countries. Ariel Levin-Waldman, I-24 News.
Okay, we're taking a break. Coming up, the inspirational scientist Stephen Hawking has died. We'll take a look at his life and his legacy. And after that, we'll be taking a look at what is new and what is hot and cool in the world of showbiz.
Americans have simply lost trust in news media.
What happened to the news? All I get is a daily serving of lies.
Do your job and just tell me the news.
I am overloaded with news that is useless.
Give me the facts. Let me sort it. Where's the integrity?
Why is the news so biased? I will never trust the media.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
News 24 es el magazine semanal de noticias y análisis en español de I-24 News. Mi nombre es Carlos Burovich y conmigo en el estudio Damián Pachter y Aniv Azulay.
Analizaremos todo lo que pasa en Israel y el Medio Oriente.
También pondremos nuestra mirada en el mundo hispanoparlante.
News 24 es el magazine semanal en español todos los viernes solo en I-24 News.
I-24 News.
Here in Israel, but my parents are from Uzbekistan, and I really like this one. It's a rice Originally, it's made out with meat. I'm vegan, almost 100%, on my way to be completely vegan. So I decided to take this kitchen and make it vegan, and it's a big challenge. In this specific dish, when I use mushroom, for example, it has a lot of umami taste. You really feel that you eat something with strong personality or body. It's not like meat. I don't want it to be like meat. I don't care about that, but I do want something instead of it. What I really like about this kind of dishes, of course, it's come from Uzbekistan, but you can make it everywhere. And here in Israel, I really like to buy my vegetables, especially the green ones, local and organic. It really put a lot of impact of how my dish is going to be. I remember when I was a child, my mom, she was new in Israel, few years. She didn't really cook this traditional food, but specific this one, she made it, I think, the best. I remember every Friday afternoon, we used to sit, me and my sisters, in front of the TV on the carpet, and she cooked in the kitchen. And then before dinner, Shabbat dinner, she brings just a little bit on a small plate. Wow. I made it for you, and now I let you taste it with my hand. Like I put my goodwill and my hand in your stomach. The Uzbekian essence of spirit, it's really warm atmosphere. It's all about family and together and sitting together and feeding each other. You always feel like you are celebrating. Hi. Yeah.
Welcome back to Perspectives. Acclaimed physicist Stephen Hawking has died 55 years after he was given only 2 years to live. Famous for making groundbreaking advances in physics despite almost total paralysis, Hawking died peacefully at his home in Cambridge, England at the age of 76. Gloria Riviera takes a look back at Hawking's remarkable life.
The LHC.
Stephen Hawking will be remembered as a genius who did not let his disease stop him.
I have had ALS for practically all my adult life. Yet it has not prevented me from having a very attractive family and being successful in my work.
Hawking has been compared to Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. His best-selling book, A Brief History of Time, tackles black holes and the Big Bang Theory, subjects he spent his life exploring. In 2004, he conceded a mistake on black holes. Instead of destroying everything that falls into them, he found they do allow critical information to get out.
So we can be sure of the past, and we can predict the future.
Hawking was born in 1942. Early on, he displayed a love of science. In his early 20s, already a physics phenom at Cambridge University, Hawking was first diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. But Hawking said that physics can take one beyond one's physical limitations. He certainly took science beyond the classroom and into popular culture, even appearing on television shows such as The Simpsons.
If you are looking for trouble, you found it.
Yeah, just try me, you... Oh!
His spirit of adventure also led him to accept an offer to experience weightlessness.
It was amazing.
Asked many times if his disability held him back, Hawking simply said it gave him more time to think. For the world of science, it wasn't time enough.
Here to shed some light on the physicist who revolutionized our understanding of black holes is astronomer Dr. Aviv Ophir of Israel's Weizmann Institute. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Explain for us mere muggles, what was Hawking's great contribution to science?
Well, Hawking contemplated a few of the things that are most fundamental to physics, in the sense that what happens in extreme conditions, i.e. meaning the conditions that happen inside black holes and the Big Bang itself. And therefore he did not contribute something that you can go to the supermarket with today yet, but he helped to understand if our laws of physics, the things that we think govern our world, are correct. And the best place to examine these laws is in extreme conditions.
Stephen Hawking is popularly, at least, compared to Einstein, a genius on that scale. Is that an accurate comparison?
They shared a common interest. They researched the same things. I don't think it's the same scale, but I'm just me.
No, but that's an interesting question, because Stephen Hawking's image, I mean, very possibly contributed by the fact that he was in a wheelchair, which made his story all the more extraordinary, was that he was a scientist who made revolutionary changes on the scale of Einstein. Is that not true?
He did advance his field significantly. He was, and I'm sorry to say in past tense, was, indeed a very important scientist and great contributor. I don't think quite on the scale of Einstein. Einstein has a few on his scale, but certainly an important person, important
How do you think
scientist.
the history of science would have been different if Hawking hadn't done the unprecedented and lived for 55 years with this motor neuron disease?
I think this would, his longevity is more advancing biology and the research for ALS, his illness, his condition, and the fact that he lived for so long and allowed for astronomy and astrophysics to advance I don't have an alternate universe to see through.
Hawking might.
Hawking might, yeah. But if
there is
Hawking
a parallel universe somewhere in which you gave a different answer.
But if Hawking hadn't lived for so long, I think that what he discovered would have been discovered by others.
I mean, he was working certainly towards his very last day, thinking away, coming up with other theories, trying to understand the universe. What are the big questions, the open questions that he has now left for future physicists to try and solve?
Hawking's great dream was to unify the two great theories of physics. Currently, physics has two great theories. One of them is theory of general relativity, developed by Einstein, that describes how things behave when things are very heavy and move very fast, on the order of the speed of light. The other theory is the quantum mechanics, that describes what happens when things are very, very small. There are very few cases where things are both heavy and small, like black holes.
Right.
So most of the time you don't need both theories. You can make do with one of them. And it's very good that you need only one, because they are contradictory.
A theory of everything.
Yes, so he wanted to find the theory of everything, because our theories in plural are contradicting each other. So it's a great challenge to unify them both.
Hawking never won a Nobel Physics Prize. How's that possible?
The choices of the Nobel Committee has been perplexing at times.
But presumably this has been a question that the scientific community has been asking every year. Surely this is the year in which Hawking gets his prize, no?
I do not know. I'm not in touch with the committee.
Okay, well, I mean, from your experience within the scientific community, how do you expect them to honor Hawking's legacy now?
I believe that they would want to advance his field of research, and therefore it is likely that they would establish some kind of scholarships or prizes to attract young scientists that work in this field and fund them to continue his research.
And do you see, I mean, also from your experience working within the field of science, that Hawking served as a very real inspiration for disabled people who are now being more and more active within the world of science, because he proved really anything is possible?
Indeed, I certainly hope so. I think that what he accomplished was unbelievable, and he had luck that what he was interested in or interested in was something that requires a lot of thinking and not a lot of physical effort, which was very fortunate for him. So he proposed to the disabled people try to find something that your limitation does not limit you.
Truly extraordinary and inspiration for everyone. Dr. Aviv Ophir, thank you very much for joining us to discuss Stephen Hawking. Well, from a brief history of time to a wrinkle in time, up next, Hollywood.
I'm Barbara Opal-Rome for Strictly Security at I-24 News. Join us for incisive reports and in-depth discussion on defense technology, cyber, and strategic affairs.
Saturdays, 8:05 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
I-24 News.
I'm David Schuster.
And I'm Shayna Stulin.
Join us on I-24 News for our show Crossroads.
We bring you a comprehensive
and engaging
look at the global news and opinions from the crossroads of America.
Weeknights beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on I-24 News.
And finally, for the latest on what's happening in the world of show business, here is Dana Bacchus from Hollywood.
No more pillow talk for artist Zayn and his longtime girlfriend Gigi Hadid. The couple announced their split on Twitter. Each had positive things to say about the other. The news was first reported by the British tabloid The Sun, which claimed the two drifted apart due to pressures of their careers.
We heard a cry out in the universe.
Ava DuVernay has a lot to celebrate. After taking in more than $33 million opening weekend, her movie A Wrinkle in Time is currently second at the box office behind Black Panther.
Whether it be the first woman of color to make a film like this, whether it be the fact that the #1 and #2 films in America right now are directed by Black directors for the first time in history, this is a time where we can feel things might be changing.
Melrose Place actress Heather Locklear has been charged with several counts of battery against first responders who answered a domestic violence call at her Southern California home. Officials say Locklear kicked, pushed, and shouted at sheriff's deputies responding to a call she had been violent with her boyfriend. No domestic violence charges have been filed. Former rapper Craig Mack, best known for the platinum 1994 hit Flavor in Your Ear, has died in South Carolina. Officials say the 47-year-old died at his home of natural causes. That's what's happening in Hollywood.
And for more on show business and glamour is I-24 News entertainment analyst Benjamin Shawn. Benjamin, from Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time to Hollywood blockbuster A Wrinkle in Time, in brief, what is this movie all about?
So the movie is a sweeping adventure children's movie that's based on the beloved classic novel by Madeleine L'Anglais, and we have a small clip to see right now.
Where are we?
We heard a cry out in the universe.
My father's alive.
We believe he is, and we're here to help you find him. We are in search of warriors.
Warriors who serve the good and the light in the universe. You're kidding.
Do I look like I'm kidding? A little. I'm not. I'm not.
Benjamin, I'm going to reserve judgment until I've watched the movie, but from the trailer it does look exceedingly silly. What sort of reception has the movie been getting?
Well, from a box office standpoint, it's doing relatively well, but critically it's received muted to negative reviews, saying it's a bit over-dramatic in scope and certainly doesn't live up to the budget or the cast that's been assembled for the feature.
And quite an extraordinary cast with possibly the next president of the United States right there,
Indeed.
Oprah Winfrey. Well, look, this is also the most expensive live-action movie ever directed by a black woman. The question of race, of course, Hollywood being very sensitive towards that. Is that one fluke, one crack in the glass ceiling, or are we beginning to see a genuine change in a trend in Hollywood?
Well, from one point of view, it's obviously a major landmark for women of color and for female directors in general. On the flip side, if the movie does not do well, then it could backfire for female directors who historically do not get the second chances that male directors do in the industry. So it could go either way. So male actors, they could make a Hollywood flop and they'll get another huge movie afterwards like it never happened. Female actors, it tends to stick with them, it becomes a mark on their career, and it's a much harder for them to rebound.
So what do you think that suggests for the director of this movie, which, as you say, isn't getting the most glowing reviews?
I think it will come down to the revenue. If it's financially successful, I think it will be overlooked. If it's neither, it could be bad for female directors.
Well, it all comes down to money, bringing us on to our next subject. The producers of the stunning Netflix series The Crown had a surprising, perhaps not surprising, revelation to make at a conference in Jerusalem that upset some people. What did they say?
Yeah, so the producers of The Crown, among other things, revealed that Claire Foy, who plays the Queen in The Crown,
sublimely,
yes, amazingly, was not paid as much as Matt Smith, who plays a much lesser role of Prince Philip.
Yes. Right, but I mean, the producers said, look, the reason was Matt Smith came with a history of having played Doctor Who. He was the more famous actor. Claire Foy was less well known, and so they paid him more because he brought name recognition. I mean, is that not a fair argument?
It definitely could have been a fair argument for season 1. However, that pay gap was not rectified for season 2. After the show was massively successful, Claire Foy won basically all the awards you can win for the TV series, and still...
And very richly deserved.
Yes, and still Matt Smith was paid more for a much lesser role in the series, so people are confused as to why that happened.
And how common is that across show business for women still to be paid less than men for playing essentially equivalent roles?
Well, unfortunately, it's still very common and historically has been the status quo. It's almost been expected. There's been a long-standing idea in Hollywood that male actors are the ones who bring in the money, they're the one who bring in the audience, but that's never actually been replicated in the facts.
Okay, Benji Sean bringing us the latest on news from Hollywood. Thank you very much for joining us. And that brings us to the end of today's show. It has been a pleasure hosting here on Perspectives. As always, do follow more from us online on Facebook and on Twitter. You can also download our app on either Android or iOS to watch both live and catch up with all of our latest shows on the move. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow night. I'm Eylon Levy, and thank you for watching Perspectives.